Excellent. That's our cue. Welcome, everyone, to the October 2024 program of League of Women Voters Lincoln-Lancaster's Lunch and Learn. We're glad you've joined us today for our program about ballot issues. We all have the opportunity to be voting on this year. We'll be hearing from two of our League members who've been diligent about clarifying language, meaning, possible outcomes, and repercussions of, count them, 6 initiatives. Many of you who've joined us previously have heard from Rachel Gibson. Give us a wave, Rachel. She's been on our program several times before, and we welcome her back. She is our League of Women Voters of Nebraska Vice President of Action. And let me introduce her co-presenter, Jean McGuire. Please give us a wave. Jean is our newly appointed president of Lincoln-Lancaster's League, filling the position created by our untimely passing of Cynthia Peterson. Jean, we are grateful for your willingness to serve. I will tell you that Jean is exceedingly capable and devoted, having served in many leadership capacities in League, primarily in our neighboring state of Colorado. But she's back in Nebraska. Thank you, Jean. I'm Terry Hendrickson, chair of the Lunch and Learn program. So again, make sure you're muted and you turn off your video. So we're going to be focusing on our speakers. Today, we're going to use the chat function for asking questions. There probably will be several. Please type in your questions and comments there. Our speakers are going to be monitoring the chat throughout. We're not going to be waiting to the end as we often do. So as you're thinking of questions and we're moving through the ballot initiatives, type them in there. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, let me share my screen and, oops, hang on just a second.
While Jean figures out the tech, which thank you, Jean, much appreciated. You're the one who's managing that side of it. I'll just quick introduction. I'm Rachel Gibson. I'm the Vice President of Action for League of Women Voters of Nebraska. Absolutely delighted today to talk about what we are calling Ballot Palooza, because there are quite a few. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about kind of how we got here, some context about the ballot process itself and how it runs in Nebraska. And then we're going to actually walk through some of the initiatives together. Our goal really as a nonpartisan organization is to help educate and help folks really understand what is being asked so that they're able to vote the way that they intend and want to vote. So that's kind of the goal here behind our presentation. So Jean, are you ready?
Are you seeing that okay?
We are, but it's only part of the screen. So if you can make it the whole screen, like the little green button in the top left might do the trick. It's left on my screen. It might be right on your screen. The 3 little dots like the stoplight.
Hang on, I'm not sure I'm seeing it.
Up near the apple. Other side of the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going. Hit the green. It should. You were going. Go back.
I don't have it.
Okay, it's fine.
Oh, let me see what I can do. Or we can switch to a PowerPoint, the PowerPoint itself. Let me just see if I can stretch that out.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. There you go.
How's that?
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so let's get on to our first screen here. A little bit about the League. You're probably familiar with what we do. A lot of you probably are members of the League. So of course, we just remind everyone that we're a nonpartisan nonprofit group that really is focused and run by Nebraskans. So we are really concerned about what's going on in our state and making sure folks are educated. So it's Nebraskans teaching Nebraskans. And we do 2 different areas. Most people are familiar with our voter services area, our education piece, registration. We also have a legislative group, which works at the state level and really is looking at the policy being made at the state level, and that's the area I work in. So we have a wonderful volunteer group of about 30 working in these 6 different areas so that we're up to date on what's happening in our state. And many of our ballot initiatives fall under those things. So I think the next piece is just kind of tell you where we're headed today. Like I said, we are talking about what the history is. Oh, I forgot. I have this really cool map that shows where we are located, our 4 areas. And then of course our members at large that we have across the state, which is really fantastic. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit first about that piece of where our rules come from in the state of Nebraska. So there's kind of 2 guidelines for what happens as far as legislation is concerned and laws are concerned. And the first one is the state constitution. So the state constitution is the absolute highest level of the law in the state, and nothing can be written in conflict with it. So it's generally a guideline for concepts, and then our legislature makes more specific statutes related to that. However, that sometimes those statutes are in conflict. So it is changeable. But it's very difficult. It requires a vote of the people, and it is, we have quite a large constitution. So in Nebraska, our constitution is a little more specific than most. So that's one way we kind of get the guidelines. The second is state statute. So we've got these guidelines, you can't break these rules. Now let's get into the specific. So it's the manifestation or the interpretation of those ideas in our constitution. Not all topics that we legislate on are specifically mentioned in our constitution. Again, it's kind of that general, almost vibes. I hate using that word, but it's like the vibe. As long, again, as it's not in direct conflict. These are laws that are written by the legislature, signed into law by the governor, and they are much easier to change because they can do that in a legislative session without taking it to a vote of the people. So having that concept is going to be really important in these particular ballot initiatives. So the legislature is the primary policymaking entity, but we are lucky in Nebraska in that we have the ability to propose constitutional amendments through an initiative and referendum process. So that is what we're going to talk a little more about, how we've used that to our benefit. Okay, and Jean, I'm actually gonna, do you mind if I try to share my screen? Because I got the slideshow, should have the slideshow up and running, okay.
Hey, I can share and you can take over.
Let me see if it lets me. Zoom, see if I can share my screen. Okay, 1 second. It is mad at me, all right. I just think that'll float a little better.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks everybody for your patience. We have been working on this for quite a while because it is an undertaking to say the least. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share this and then see if I can make this. Hold on, make this as a slideshow. Seeing how the sausage is being made, just like the legislature. See how I tied that in there? Okay, let's see if it'll mean. Okay, are people seeing mine now? Is that okay? Does that work all right?
Yep.
Yes,
Perfect.
yes.
Okay, there we go. I just want to make sure we get all the pieces here. All right. So back to what we're talking about. We've got the 2 different ways that we have rules in the state. The second one, which is that legislative piece. Now we want to talk about referendums and initiatives in Nebraska. So this is the piece that is where the people really get a voice, and not all states offer this opportunity. So we're kind of unique in that with just a handful of other states. It basically allows voters to put questions about the state law or constitution on the ballot directly for registered voters to vote on. So what is the difference between these 2? The first is an initiative, and that is to add, change a law, or amend the state constitution. So if you hear the word initiative, because sometimes they get used interchangeably, but just as clarity, initiative is to add or change a law or amend the constitution. A referendum, which we have one this year, is to repeal a law that the legislature recently passed. So one is to add or adjust, the other is to remove a law that the legislature put in order. So when we do these referendums and initiatives, there's kind of three groups involved. So again, this is the people side of things. In people-led ballot initiatives, you have the sponsor. So that's the people or the group that files with the Secretary of State that we want to run this thing, we want this to be on the ballot, and then they manage the distribution. And I know some of you are very familiar with this because I know you've volunteered with some recent ballot initiatives. Circulators, that's probably what you were most likely doing. So that second group is the circulators, the people who collect the signatures on those petition forms. And then finally, we have the signers, which are registered voters in Nebraska who sign to say, yeah, you know, actually, I think we as the people should get to vote on whatever we're aiming at there. So how is a petition successful? Again, we're thinking in terms of we want enough people in the state to say, we think it's valuable that we vote on that. So it's not, you know, one gal saying all shoes need to be blue and now that's on the ballot. We have to have everyone else's buy-in. So a successful petition needs between 10% of registered voters. And there's nuances about time and type and things like that, but that's the ballpark. And then we need at least 5% of registered voters in 38 of the 93 counties. And that really is to make sure that we are making sure everybody in our state is being represented and not just one demographic. Okay, so this is probably more in depth than most people are familiar with, but just to kind of walk through what this process looks like, because it has impacted the ballot initiatives we're seeing this year. This is what that process is. You got to file the petition, then you circulate, you have a certain amount of time to collect those signatures. Once you've got all those, you formally submit the petition. That's where the people we get to sit back. That's funny. I was going to say we get to sit back and relax, but we don't. But it is out of our hands now. Then it goes to the Secretary of State's office, where they go through the verification process, making sure all those signatures are legitimate, naming it, having the official language. And then we kind of come back in with some of that voter education information. Then we have the election, and then the outcome is declared. And it's going to move that smoothly, just super smooth. There will be no hiccups in November. So I've included some additional information if you really want to get into the weeds about what this looks like. We're not going to jump in, but we will share the slides. Okay, so that's kind of how the ballot process works. And I'm going to, before we shift to talk about actually the initiatives that are there, if you've got questions related to the process, throw them in the chat while we kind of wrap up this part of the conversation. I do see Renee saying, is there a time limit to start a referendum after a law is passed? Great question. Yes, there's a certain window of time, and I don't want to say the wrong amount. It's a few months. Jean, do you know off the top of your head?
I sure do. That is, so a deadline for veto referendums is 90 days after the final adjournment of the state legislature, at which the targeted bill was passed.
Perfect. Thank you, Jean. I was unsure, so I appreciate that. All right, so again, throw those questions about the process in the chat. Let's talk about considering ballot questions. And this is the part that I think is probably going to be most useful, and especially for friends and family as you talk to them. How do you consider a ballot question? First, understand how the question is going to be asked. This sounds silly, but the words, it could be you're voting yes or no, repeal or retain, for or against. The nuance of that can make a bunch of difference, especially if you're not really plugged in and in the weeds on this all the time, and you just think vote yes on whatever, and you get in and it says retain or repeal, and you're like, I don't know which is yes. So know the language being used. Understand what your vote will actually do. So this is what we're here to help with, is a little like reading through the policy language to really understand the implications of what your vote does, because again, our goal is to make sure that you know so that you can vote what you want to vote for. Focus on the underlying issue. Sometimes if you're faced with like these two very in-depth descriptions and you're trying to figure it forward, step back and say, okay, we're talking about medical marijuana. let me step back and think, what do I think about medical marijuana? Okay, which one of these fits that? So sometimes it's helpful to step back and look at the underlying issue. Another useful tool, as more and more states have started to use the ballot initiative process, particularly around things like abortion, there's just been lots more focus and lots more complications in how we do ballot initiatives. So a good indicator is also to explore who sponsored the actual petition or referendum, and then also who's supporting them, who's funding them, who's been collecting signatures. Again, not an end all be all, but a good indicator to kind of help you make sure you're aligning with what you think you're aligning with, if that makes sense. And I would say the way to do this is Open Secrets is a great website that you could spend lots of time on in the middle of the night when you can't sleep to figure out where money is going in politics. Another is the Nebraska Disclosure website. Not particularly easy to use, but the information is definitely there. And then finally, trusted news sources. One I would really highlight folks check out is the Nebraska Examiner's summary article about not on the ballot initiatives, but it also gets a little bit at that, who sponsors, who is involved, things of that nature. So finally, utilize multiple sources of information, verify between a couple different things. If you heard one thing and you're like, I don't know, that seems kind of weird, find it in several other places, preferably ones that maybe don't even have the same perspective or spin or lens. Okay.
Okay.
So,
It's
Jean,
me.
it's you.
So let's get into the initiatives and referenda that's on the ballot in November. So if you remember all those people out at every farmer's market, it seems like hundreds of people trying to get your signature. There were 11 petitions that were being circulated. Of that, we have 6 that have hit the ballot for November. The way we're going to talk about these is in 4 different topics. 1 is abortion, 2 private school scholarships, 3 paid sick leave, and 4 medical cannabis. Now, if you want to go ahead and go to the next one, Rachel. So on the ballot, they're not necessarily going to be in that order. So when the Secretary of State certified the ballot on September 13th, they randomly assigned ballot numbers to each of the ballot initiatives or referendums. So in the case of like abortion, the first one on the ballot, number 434, Protect Women and Children, is the first one. And then the other abortion initiative is the last one on the ballot. So please be aware of that as you start to look at your ballot.
And fun fact, I learned that the way they pick those numbers is literally out of a hat. And there were people witnessing. It was a big thing. Anyway, found that was interesting.
That is interesting. The other thing to note is there are some important dates coming up. If you're like me, I did a absentee ballot. I got it yesterday, finished it yesterday, and are going to be able to mail it today. But there are important deadlines that are coming up, and you can find these dates also on, I think, when we sent this notice of this meeting, we also sent a link to a 1-page or it's double-sided summary of all the ballot initiatives. And at the bottom of it is these important election dates as well. So I'm going to turn back over to Rachel to cover the bucket number 1.
Yes, so bucket number 1, and I just want to reiterate again, we're talking about these in topics because that's the most helpful way to explain them, but this is not the exact order they're going to be on your ballot. Generally they will, but again, the abortion one is split first and last. So the way that we thought this would be helpful to think about this is to talk first about what is the current law, and then what each initiative or referendum would do. So to start with, abortion. The current law on abortion is that it is legal up until 12 weeks. A physician can perform an abortion up to 12 weeks. They can perform after, according to the law, in cases of medical emergency or pregnancy resulting from sexual assault or incest. So that is the current law. What the first initiative would do, so let's talk about this first one, called Protect Women and Children. I'm not going to read you the official language. You can see what it says there. But basically what this would do would be to amend the Constitution to prohibit abortion after the first trimester. Again, that is 12 weeks, unless in the case of what they define as medical emergency or when the pregnancy resulted from sexual assault or incest. On its face, that sounds very similar to what our current law is. There's nuances here. So when we think about what a for and against means, if you were to vote for 434, protect women and children, that would constitutionally prohibit abortion after the first trimester, with the exceptions listed. The important part to know here is that it stops at 12. There can be no legislation that gives any reason after 12 other than what they've noted here. They can, however, remember thinking back to statutes versus Constitution, pass a law that makes it more restrictive. So that's when you think about the Protect Women and Children 434, the language is specifically around when abortion is restricted. So a vote against this would just keep the 12-week limit we've got with the existing exceptions and allows the legislature to enact additional regulations. So that's the first one. That's going to show up first on your ballot. The second one, which is listed last on your ballot, so flip it over, 439 is the protect the right to abortion. Longer description here. And what essentially means is that it gives the constitutional right to abortion based on fetal viability. And it provides some description of what that can include, but generally medically, that's defined as 23 weeks of pregnancy, or as a result of other medical things that are happening that affect the viability, meaning ability for that child to survive outside the womb. And it also provides protections for the health or life of the pregnant patient. Who decides this? It's very clearly marked here that it is determined by the healthcare practitioner and the patient, the pregnant patient. So one of the important differences here, again, is a vote for this constitutionally requires the right to abortion based on viability. So that's the tool we're using instead of a week mark, as determined by the patient and their health practitioner. And this is an important detail, prohibits the legislature from enacting additional regulations in conflict with that. So as we talked about with the previous one, it's basically saying you can do up to 12 weeks and we can maybe restrict that further if the legislature wants to. This is saying it is based on the idea of viability of when an abortion can happen. And there is a right to, you can't restrict that more by the legislature, if that makes sense. So that's an important difference. So as we talked about, the vote for is allowing on that viability with the practitioner and prohibits the legislature from enacting something in conflict. A vote against, again, keeps the current 12-week limit with existing exceptions and allows the legislature to add additional regulations. Now, before we move to the next issue, I want to be clear about how this is unusual. It is very unusual to have two ballot items that are essentially in conflict. So both of these cannot exist in the same world because they're saying different things. So the question then becomes, if both of them are on the ballot, what happens if both of them pass? And to pass, it's 50% and one vote. So if we just had one of these, it would just be 50% and one vote. That's the new constitutional rule, law, so on and so forth. But because we have both of these and they're in conflict, it becomes whichever has the more yes votes. So that's why it's so important to be able to kind of tease out the differences, help people understand what they're really voting for here. Because some people, I could definitely see a voter walking in and saying, either I absolutely want access to abortion or I absolutely don't want access to abortion, and then voting both yes and both no based on that. And they're not really voting the way they intended to. So that's why that nuance is important. Yes.
Yeah, we have a few questions in the chat.
Perfect. What we got? Let's see.
First one in 434, how late could an abortion take place if there's a medical complication?
Okay, so in 434, which let's go back to 434, that is the first one that's, oh, nope, other direction. Going to show up on your ballot. That's the Protect Women and Children. For medical complications, it's a little gray. And part of this is in talking with folks in the medical community, the way this is written says medical emergencies can happen anytime after the 12 weeks. However, the way this has played out in other states, and frankly, the way this is already playing out in our state past 12 weeks is OBGYNs don't know what that actually means. And so there's a hesitancy to intervene. And as we've seen in other states, that's led to some pretty serious things, including deaths. So technically, until the end of pregnancy, in practicality, that's usually not the case. And when we say complications, we're not talking about like, man, I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to have this baby in me anymore, which I've had too, I understand. But we're talking like horrible situations that threaten the life of the mother or the baby. Okay, there's some more there, Jean.
Yeah, who is behind 434 and 439?
Who's behind 434 and 439? Again, I would really encourage you to dig into those resources, but just broadly, the folks who sponsored, I'm going to talk about them out of order for a second, because chronologically, the Protect the Right to Abortion was the first ballot initiative, and that is supported by Planned Parenthood, ACLU, I'd Be Black Girl, organizations that really focus on access to reproductive care. The 434, which is the first one on the ballot, but was the second one to get started, has been more supported by private donors, including the Ricketts family. So I know there are religious organizations that have affiliated with this, but I don't want to say that they sponsored because I don't believe they were technically a sponsor. So.
Can you clarify again how Initiative 434 allows further restrictions when Initiative 439 does not, even when neither specifies this in the ballot language?
Yes, great question. So that goes back to, remember, we've got our Constitution that makes rules, and then we've got our legislature that makes rules. The way these are written is that 434, the Protect Women and Children, the first one on your ballot, is talking about, I'm going to come back to the exact language. When you look at that up where it says official language, except when a woman seeks an abortion necessitated by medical emergency or when pregnancy results from sexual assault or incest, unborn children shall be protected from abortion. Unborn children shall be protected from abortion in the second and third trimester. So they're saying absolutely no abortion second and third trimester. There's no indication of that you can't restrict it further. There's nothing that says you have to be able to have one, because again, it's not protecting the right to abortion. It's protecting the right to the unborn child to be protected from abortion. Does that make sense? It's honestly, I think it may be purposely a little confusing, both because it's just a nuanced issue that we're trying to legislate or write rules around medicine, which is not how legal language works. So that's part of why it's complicated. I want to clarify in this real quick why 439 is different, because if you read this one, the very first part says all persons shall have a fundamental right to abortion until fetal viability. So this is the right to abortion, whereas the previous one was the right to not have abortion. Make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. And because this one is that they've got that fundamental right, the legislature can't write laws in conflict, they're not supposed to, with the Constitution, and that's why they can't restrict it further.
Would you also say that it's called out with without interference from the state or political subdivisions? Is that kind of the legislature can't get involved?
That's a great point, Jean. That's a great point. I hadn't thought of that element of it, but yeah.
Okay. Will a law passed by Congress supersede a Nebraska constitutional amendment?
Yes. So, well, yes. Federal law supersedes state law.
And it just talks about there's false ads featuring a woman saying, you know, I'm not sure if there's a question, but that was more of a comment.
I would like to throw out there, Gina, this is a good segue. So there's an organization called the Nebraska Alliance for Physician Advocacy, who have a couple OBGYNs who have talked about this at length, and they are going to be releasing a podcast about that. That would be a great one. I'm sure we can refer folks to listen to get into that, because there are medical providers on both sides of these. So it's important to dig into what the actual medical data on the ground is.
Right. And I don't necessarily see any other further questions in the chat. So why don't we go ahead and go to topic number 2?
Perfect.
This is private school scholarships. So this one's a little bit confusing too, because we had a previous private school scholarship program, LB 753, known as the Opportunity Scholarship, which gave tax credits to donors. Now, with this new law, which is 1402, the Opportunity Scholarship goes away, expires, and then a state-run, publicly funded private school scholarship program of $10 million will replace it. So that's LB 1402. So it's getting rid of the other one, and here's the new one. So I'm going to describe it. So the legislative bill 1402 provides state funds for K through 12 private school scholarships with a starting cost of $10 million a year. So it's starting at 10, and the legislature could change that dollar amount going forward. So a vote to retain enacts the state-run private school scholarship program, and a vote to repeal would get rid of this. It's a section 1 of 1402, which is around the private school scholarships of $10 million. And then the second part of LB 1402, which repealed that Opportunity Scholarship, that would just go, it's already gone away. So it's getting rid of that first part of the $10 million scholarship, going public funds going to private school scholarship program. It's a little confusing, so it's either retain or repeal. Do we have any questions on that?
We see one about abortion, which I'd like to circle back to because I want to make sure we get through everything. So
Okay.
Any questions on the education? Happy to address those now, and then we'll circle back to all of our abortion questions, because there will be some. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to go to our topic 3, which is paid sick leave. So the current law, there is no Nebraska state law which requires private non-governmental employers to offer paid time off for sick or vacation time. Now, Nebraska private employers are subject to the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, which entitles eligible employees to take unpaid job protective leave for specific family or medical reasons. So you can go ahead. Initiative 436.
My computer's disagreeing with me. Hang on. There we go.
Okay. 436. So this requires Nebraska private non-governmental employers to allow employees to earn a minimum number of paid sick leave days per year, 40 hours for employers with under 20 employees, and 56 hours for employers with more than 20 employees. This also prohibits retaliation against employees for exercising such rights, adopts documentation requirements, and establishes enforcement powers and a civil cause of action for violations. So a vote for requires all public employers to allow employees to earn 5 to 7 paid leave days. A vote against would keep our current situation where employers are not required to provide any paid leave. So that's 436 paid sick leave. I don't see any questions on that one. So let's go to our third.
All right.
Budget.
On to our second topic that has two items listed on our ballots, medical cannabis. So broadly, currently the current law is that marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance, which means possession, any reason, medical or recreational, is illegal. And the penalties range from infractions to a high-class felony. So marijuana is not legal in any case, and there are small to very huge implications. Current law. So the first one you're going to see, 437, is the Cannabis Patient Protection Act. And what this does, and you'll see this in the description, is basically allows a patient with a recommendation from a healthcare practitioner and their caregiver. So if they need someone to assist them, perhaps they have a severe medical issue that they need assistance with that, to buy, possess, or use small amounts of cannabis for medical purposes. It gets into some of the nuances of that, but broadly, it's basically saying if your healthcare provider has said you can use this, it is legal for you to buy it, have it, use it. So a vote for legalizes small amounts of medical cannabis in the ways we talked about, and a vote against keeps any type of use of cannabis, medical included, illegal in the state of Nebraska. I'm gonna move to the next one, and then again, if you've got marijuana questions, put them in the chat, and we can kind of look at these two together. So that's the first one. That's the patient side. The second one, 438, is the Nebraska Medical Cannabis Regulation item. So this basically creates the Nebraska Cannabis Commission, Medical Cannabis Commission, to regulate possession, manufacturing, distribution, delivery, and dispensing for medical purposes, and then protects the individuals who are licensed to do that, essentially, from being penalized, from being litigated against. So a vote for legalizes and regulates the medical cannabis industry, the industry itself. A vote against, again, keeps all cannabis, medical included, illegal, and therefore there's no regulations because it's illegal. So these two medical ones, or medical marijuanas, go together. The first one is about should patients be able to be prescribed it and use it for medical purposes. The second is about should there be a regulations around that in the state of Nebraska. So those are the two medical marijuana ones. There's a chance that someone might want to vote for one and against the other. Again, our purpose is to help people vote what they're intending to vote for. And if you're opposed or for medical marijuana, you're probably voting yes on both or no on both. But maybe there's another reason you're not. Questions about medical marijuana?
Yeah, so we had one question. Are folks afraid that medical will eventually allow all to use, not just medical? What has happened in other states?
I think that is, we're drifting into the political realm, but I do think that's a concern for folks who oppose medical marijuana, is that this is kind of the first step in opening up. Another consideration as people are considering this is looking at the other states that have had different variations of this and the number of states. That would be, if in making an informed decision, that would be a really great way to kind of get a sense of what's happening in other states.
I would say, Rachel, that in talking with the sponsors of this legislation, that this is, with the single subject rule in Nebraska, they had to go as narrow as they possibly could. And if people want to extend that, let's say, I'm in Western Nebraska, I'm far away from any place that would have this in a doctor or anything. Can I grow my own? No, this is not part of that. It will always take additional legislation to do more things.
That's a really good clarification, Jean.
And then another question, would this Medical Marijuana Commission also regulate the distribution of licensing? Do you want me to take that one as well?
Yeah, please do.
So once again, talking to the sponsors, if these pass, the legislature will still need to develop the rules, clarify things like what is a medical practitioner, who does qualify for being able to get medical marijuana, and so the commission and what the commission will be able to do will also need to be flushed out by the legislature as if these both pass. Hopefully
you.
that helps.
I'm seeing one, since ballots have already been printed, what happens if signatures are disqualified and this initiative is rendered moot? Ah, what a great question. So with any of these, we can vote on something, and anyone can bring a lawsuit against it. And I anticipate, I don't have specifics, but I just anticipate there will be probably some lawsuits on some of these, if not all of them. Then it would go through the courts. So if we have, particularly these things that are not constitutional amendments, so the paid sick leave, the medical cannabis, and the scholarship referendum, those are all, again, those are law, statute, not constitution. So someone could come and say, I actually think that's unconstitutional, go through that lawsuit. The court would rule whether it is or it isn't. So yes, it's possible, but there's no automatic. They would need a lawsuit to bring against that and the court to rule in their favor. All right. The federal paid leave does not require companies to pay employees. The state requires paid leave. Okay, if I'm understanding the question, yes, FMLA does not, the family medical leave does not require paid leave. It requires time off, but it doesn't require that paid piece. And the state the second part, the state requires paid leave. So currently, our state has no rules about paid leave. If this was implemented, if this initiative passes, yes, they would require that certain amount for the employer to pay. That's not state funded. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the onus on the individual. Now, we clarified that this applies to non-governmental because the state government does actually provide some leave benefits, like the Nebraska state government, if you work for them, does provide some benefits. So that's, they're already doing some of that.
So, and then I think this only deals with employers with more than 20 employees. No, let's see.
It's the difference of hours, right?
Difference of employers that have 20 employees or less and employers that have more than 20 employees on how much time they can earn.
So both of them would be, all employers would be required, but the amount of time varies based on the number of employees.
Right.
Okay. I'm just moving us to the question screen because we're already there, which is great, Let's see. So if I want women to be able to have abortions, I think I should vote against 434 and 439. Is this correct? The largest ability to have access to reproductive care via abortions, yes. 434 provides restrictions, 439 provides the largest access to that, correct? If that's your goal. I did also see someone asked where the league stands on these. We do have stances, but not in this, not with this hat on. This, we are just education. If you are interested in that, you can check out our, the state league has some stances on things. Feel free to go check that out. So again, our focus is to make sure that we're helping you understand what you're voting for so you're able to vote for what you want. Okay, they're coming fast and furious. Let's see. There was an earlier question. Someone asked about PTO, paid sick leave. Is this in addition to paid time off days? Some businesses have a general pool of PTO. And Jean, feel free to correct me, but that paid sick leave would be required to be available for sick, correct?
Sick or time. Yeah, I think I'm not sure what the answer to that question is.
Okay.
And so I don't want to answer it because I'm not sure.
Okay. If we have any HR experts on, tell us.
I'd like to just pop in at this time as there are
Sure.
maybe a few more questions coming on. We've got maybe 15 minutes left, and this has been a great generation of questions and so forth. I want to mention to the folks who have joined us today, again, thanks. And I want to let you know that if you're interested in learning more about League, I've pasted our web address there for you in the chat if you want to take a peek and learn more about us and take a look at some of the previous Lunch and Learn programs we've had. We've had some really outstanding ones just like the one you're experiencing today. If you want to learn more, please consider joining us for coffee and conversation this Saturday, October 5th, at Rock and Joe's Coffee Bar from 9 to 11. You can find out where that is. If you're in the Lincoln area, that'd be great. And I also want to let you know that in addition to Election Day coming up, 48 hours after Election Day, that is the first Thursday, we're going to have a November 7th Lunch and Learn as scheduled, and it's going to be a little bit different. We are planning to host a diverse group of individuals who are going to be talking around and about this. Post-election, how are we doing? There are probably going to be some question marks floating around for 48 hours after the election. There will be some cheers, some jeers, some feelings, some emotions, and we're going to be prepared for that. Certainly, we're concerned about individual well-being, but we feel the bigger issue is our collective well-being as a community, state, and nation. Regardless of outcomes, unity of purpose, I feel, maybe we feel it's a huge issue. Can we find common vision to heal our divisions? We'll see. And with that, I'll stop talking and see if we have some other questions. It's good to get in the weeds and see if we've got some other questions that need to be addressed. We've got some experts here joining us today about our Nebraska ballot issues. Are there any other questions that you've seen here, Rachel and Jean, that we should talk about?
There are a couple, yes. So thank you for those updates. And I really would, I love the Lunch and Learn series. Please share it with everyone. I think this is such a fantastic service for our state that the Lincoln-Lancaster lead provides. So thank you for managing these. Shifting back to questions, and feel free to keep adding them in there. I'm still a little unclear on how 434 compares to current law. Same as current law, more restrictive, less restrictive. Great question. It basically takes the law, which we can, the law that's written now is in pencil. Think of it this way. The law that's written now is in pencil. Basically, what we're taking with 434 is then putting it in marker. And so it's going to be harder to change. It's the same kind of timeline restrictions, but you can't change it unless you make it even more restrictive. Does that make sense? So it is, baseline reads the same, but allows for more restriction, and it makes it more permanent because it's harder to change. The only way to change the Constitution is through a vote of the people. So it's not something the legislature could change. Hopefully that gives a little more clarity on that. 23 weeks is about double the current amount, almost 6 months. So 23, yes. I want to clarify on that. The language of the actual ballot initiative for 439, the Protect the Right to Abortion, is about viability. And again, I'm gonna shout out the Napa podcast we just did. Full disclosure, I'm on that board, and it was a fantastic conversation. So you'll hear me in that podcast too. But it was a fantastic conversation because the physicians talked about what impacts viability. And while we'll broadly say that 21 to 3 weeks is the viability lens, it depends on the patient. It depends on how much the baby weighs. It depends on all sorts of things. So we may be saying that that's the ballpark, but again, the line is viability. It's not about how far along someone necessarily is in the pregnancy, because you could get to the 9th month. Well, that's not really a fair assessment. You could get to later in your pregnancy, 3rd trimester, and something catastrophic, awful, terrible happens that no one would want, and that may affect viability. So that's why it's based on that viability piece.
Rachel, can I just make a clarification too? So prior to the 12-week ban that was passed last year by the legislature, the law in Nebraska was 20 weeks, correct?
Yes.
So it went from 20 to 12, and then the one is going to say 12 hard ceiling, 434, and the other one is viability, which is closer to what it used to be. Maybe that's what I'm getting. That's what's in my mind.
Yes, it used to be 20 and it was reduced to that 12. Cindy says, if 434 throws it back to the legislature to tweak, is it possible to put more restrictions on doctors, women's? Yes, exactly. Well said, Cindy. That is exactly what it would allow to do. Sharon Seth, could you put a link to the podcast you just mentioned? Yes, I will put a link to the page. I don't believe that we have posted that particular podcast yet, but I'll send you to the organization so you can, once it is updated in the next couple of days, you should be able to.
And then I just want to respond to, we have a league member, appreciate the write-up on the league. The league is done on the ballot initiatives, the summary. You can share that with anybody and everybody that you know.
Yes, please do. And we thank you so much to the crew that helped us put that together. That was a labor of love and a group effort. And we worked very hard and talked to some other folks to make sure that it really was nonpartisan, factual, just the information.
And I did run it by the Lancaster County Election Commission, and they were okay with it as well.
Perfect. See, somebody checking our work. That's the league. We like to make sure we're doing it right. Okay, I saw one in there about, I think I saw one about vouchers. Does the end result have vouchers either by keeping the previous statute or replacing it with the new voucher statute? Jean, you want to take that one?
I'm sorry, say that one again.
Does the end result of the vouchers, either by keeping the previous statute or replacing it with the new statute, will we have vouchers?
So if you vote to repeal 1402, we will not have vouchers. If you vote, and the vouchers being publicly funded vouchers, and if you vote to repeal, I mean, it goes away. If you vote to retain, then yes, we will have vouchers. Publicly funded is the way, yeah.
And I'm just going to get super nitpicky about language because that is a critique I have had, particularly around the school stuff. Vouchers is often how we all talk about it. Vouchers and scholarships interchangeably. They are technically different things. So it won't be a voucher program. It will be a scholarship program. The nuance is small, but just as you're talking to other people, you know, I want to make sure you have all the information. So we'll have a scholarship program, which is similar, but not exactly the same thing as vouchers. Okay, let's see. It's proposed sick leave at the state level above that which is already required at the national level. So the difference is the paid part. So nationally, the FMLA requires a certain amount of time provided, doesn't need to be paid. This, what we're asking in Nebraska, is a certain amount of time that would be paid. Now, if the question is bigger, like how does this align paid or unpaid comparatively in the amount of time, they are similar. This sort of number of hours is very similar with other sorts of paid leave and leave types programs. Hopefully that answered the question. If Roe versus Wade is 23 weeks, the Nebraska restricted to 20 weeks before the 12 weeks was legislated by Nebraska. Before that, many attempts were attempted to restrict abortion to either no weeks, true, and almost passed restricted to 6 weeks, correct? Yes. So that's a really good framing, Terry, to put that in, is if you look at the bills that have been introduced previously in the legislature, just in the past few years, we've had ones that are based on no abortion after conception. We had that really big push for the 6-week one in 2023 that fell 1 or 2 votes short. I honestly can't remember the first round that it failed. And then we actually, before Roe versus Wade fell, we had a legislator who brought a trigger law, if you've heard of that in other states, that would have automatically put in a 6-week ban once Roe fell, which was defeated again by I think 1 or 2 votes. So the context there is interest in legislating further restriction, is what I would say. All right. I'm keeping an eye on time, Terry, but there's no accountability of funds on 435, correct? Correct. So on the school scholarship piece, that $10 million, there are not a lot of restrictions. There's not the same accountability that exists just naturally in public schools. There are, I'm trying to remember if that, I know that the initial one, the Opportunity Scholarship, which has gone away now, kind of had a hierarchy of you needed to provide them to the students most at need. I honestly cannot remember if this newest version does. So that would be something I'll check on, and I can get back to folks. So yes, there's not the same accountability in many different ways. Isn't the scholarship program funds taken directly from taxpayers' funds and paid for by the state actually a type of voucher? Great question. The difference is a voucher, it's still a scholarship. So it's not automatically handing like, this is your voucher. It's not like you get a voucher for an ice cream and everyone gets it and you go get it. It's a scholarship, like here's $3 for an ice cream, if that makes more sense. All right.
I think we have time for just this one last question, and then it's time to wrap up a really good session.
Would the scholarship fund allow a group of homeschoolers to benefit? That is a really good question, and I don't have a direct answer because I haven't spent enough time with the language. I will say broadly in other states, they have expanded it to other, even things like called micro schools. So in the school choice movement, that does often eventually end up as part of it, but I cannot say exactly. I think this is just for private schools. Jean, do you know the answer to that one?
I think currently that is what it is as well.
Fascinating and interesting. It puts a lot of onus on we voters to be well-versed in what we're voting on. It's our responsibility, and it's a big one. I'm feeling a lot more educated after today on the ballot issues we're all going to be voting on here in November, or maybe earlier if we're mailing in our ballots. Thanks again, Rachel and Jean, for a great session, and to the team of people who worked on this ballot issues document. Again, you can find that on our league website. The link is in the chat. Everyone have a wonderful day. We'll look forward to seeing you next time on November 7th. We are adjourned. Thank you. Bye-bye.